Okay, so I want to delve a little bit more into Reagan's psychology. I kind of went over her backstory, like a couple weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. That's basically the gist of what I want to do, and I have made some changes or, like, updates to her backstory. Nothing with her family, so nothing that I didn't cover before, really. I vaguely touched on her past after she left Salvatore. I don't know, I haven't watched that video back in a little while. So, context, if you haven't seen that one, you might want to go watch it. It's only like 15 minutes long, come on. I put more good gameplay in the background, I'm really good. Trust. But anyways, so, I've been kind of, she's an interesting character for me to write. I feel like she's kind of, difficult to follow through, in a way. Like, I know, like, I can get an idea of how she's supposed to act, but then, or like how she thinks, but then it becomes difficult to connect that with how she actually acts in certain scenarios. So I'm really trying to work on that for sure, but I want to make connections between things in her childhood. I don't want it to seem random. Like, I want it to be kind of both a part of her nature and built up by things that happened in her life. So that's what I'm kind of trying to balance. I already went over her, like, weird hobbies and kind of family influence in the beginning, where she was already, like, a little bit kind of desensitized to violence, and she had a very peculiar interest in, like, slaughterhouses and the meat processing industry from the beginning. I didn't really delve much into her being a cannibal, but it is pretty integral to her plot. I feel like that feels like a weird thing to say, but I mean, it is. That's like a part of the kind of like image that I curated for her is the crimes that she commits and like the violence that's a part of her, and that is a part of how her psychology works because of the reasoning behind it. Do you get what I'm saying? Kind of. Okay, there has to be more stuff that I can collect and make. I'm going to look through my fridge as I keep talking. So basically, actually, I could start there. That would actually be a pretty good start, if I'm correct. Because that, I can branch off many different ways once I've talked about that. For me, especially when it comes to her relationships, I've probably stated this before, but Reagan has had 4 different marriages, starting with Salvatore, and then it branches off into 3 different ones before she is captured by Murkoff, okay? And it's actually the murder of her last husband that leads her to being captured by Murkoff. You know what? I'll go over that right now. She does not kill Salvatore. I will say that. I would love to make her do that, but at the time that she leaves, it would mess up Franco's story too much. So I'm not going to do that, obviously. I have a timeline, actually. She's married to Salvatore for 7 years, maybe? Maybe 6. I think it's 7. And she leaves because, I have yet to research how divorces work, but obviously there was not a no-fault divorce at this point in time, so it would have taken a lot for her to get divorced, especially considering who he was, so she just picked up and left. She does not take Franco with her, obviously. That would have been a very difficult thing to do, considering he was not her kid. Anyways, and she, over the course of the next year or so, travels from Louisiana to California, and this kind of mixes in at the same time. Along the way, she's, like, struggling, naturally. She probably took some cash and stuff from Salvatore, but not a lot to sustain her. So, throughout this process, she ends up, killing and cannibalizing a man out of survival, okay? Baseline, it starts out as survival cannibalism, and she develops a taste for it. That's very baseline explanation. So, she reaches California and meets a judge. His name is Walton Taylor, and she ends up marrying him. Walton is an interesting man. He's the best example of the men that Reagan would go on to marry because, well, it's a pattern, okay? There's a pattern to it. Where once she had started killing and decides that she's going to keep doing this, it becomes strategic. Marrying Walton was not necessarily strategic, but it was a pattern nonetheless, where he has power that she can exploit. He has status that she can exploit. People will look the other way. They will look the other way at his exploits, and if she plays her cards right and acts correctly, in quotations, people will look the other way at her as well. Now, naturally, she cannot tell Walton any of this, and this is what keeps the domino rolling, okay? She starts killing people in California, and I've yet to do research on slaughterhouses at the time, like, all over, but I'm assuming this is majorly before, like, laws were fully implemented to, like, completely change or eradicate the meat processing industry at the time. But either way, it's not like that really affects her. She would just find a different place to hide it. So she starts killing people and hiding bodies, or parts of bodies, in slaughterhouses around the state. I'm going to kind of be careful with my words as I go on, so I'm not going to describe it in detail, just because I don't know how YouTube's guidelines are, but that's the gist of it. This is going to be a pattern, and she starts doing that under a different identity. This is where it comes in, because right now, her first name remains the same, and her last name changes. Her first name is Devin, and her last name changes from her maiden name to, obviously, whoever she takes upon the last name of whoever she marries. So from Salvatore to Walton to the other two men that I get into later. Reagan is kind of this persona that she adopted. It's like a last name that she gave herself. It wasn't a name that was ever known directly to the public, but that was kind of in her mind. That's who she was when she was killing people. She, basically what you see, I might put some photos on screen of her design currently. Generally, I change it, I tweak it every so often. Her design is a prime asset, because her design as a prime asset is basically that, like, person that she adopted, or who she was, I guess, to, commit the crimes that she did, okay? So she changes her attire, she goes to wearing, men's clothes, and she's already, like, a very, like, tall for a woman, and stockier and whatnot, and then she wears the mask to conceal her identity. That's the whole thing. So she adopts that, and that's kind of the evidence against her that could be found at the time. And so, eventually, she's married to Walton for 5 or 6 years, I believe, before he starts suspecting her of stuff. Now, it's mostly her leaving for long hours and odd hours at the time. He thinks she's being unfaithful, that she's cheating on him. And Walton is a very interesting man, okay? He's not a very faithful judge. In fact, he's got his own prejudices and biases that affect how he does his work. He's not a good man, let's just say. He also doesn't necessarily treat Reagan that well. Like, I would say he was fairly emotionally abusive and financially controlling, and this, as well as him starting to suspect that she's cheating on him, and she realizes that he's actually close to finding out what she's actually doing. This combined leads to her to make the decision to turn her violence onto him. He's out of the picture now. And so she then flees to Arizona, I believe, where she meets her next husband, okay? And this is where that pattern where she's like, oh, I can use this to my advantage and I can just keep going, because she was never caught for that. Her third husband is technically like a slight deviation from this usual pattern, including how he is as a person. Her next husband is a man named, what was his last name? Vernon Frey. Okay, that's her third husband. Vernon Frey. And he is like an architectural historian. He does work in museums on historical architecture and antiques and preserved stuff like that, okay? So there's not really necessarily a, like, power or status that she can exploit, but he is still, like, a wealthy man because of the industry that he goes into, and he deals with a lot of other wealthy businessmen. I'm still working on Vernon as a person. I have this AU that is going on in my head, but he is not as bad of a guy as her other 3 husbands, especially Salvatore and Walton. But either way, he figures her out quicker and holds off for about a year before starting to confront her, because he's less suspicious that she's cheating, but he's also like, hey, what's going on? Where are you going? What are you doing? And I think he actually gets the closest to finding out what is actually happening, because she's doing the same thing in Arizona that she was in California. And so he comes the closest to figuring that out, and she just takes him out immediately and packs up her things and flees yet again. And this time, this is basically an ongoing cycle, and then eventually she ends up in Alabama and meets her final husband, Andrew Darch, who is a businessman in the steel industry, I believe. That's not exactly concrete, pun intended. Well, that's not actually pun intended, that's not the same industry at all, but it sounded like it was a pun, but it's not. So that's not concrete. He could be a businessman in some other industry, but either way, he's like wealthy industrialist type. The piece of the bygone industrialist era, if you know what I mean. Anyways, he is also not great. He's not as direct as Walton is, but he is generally neglectful and just like doesn't care about her. And you know what, somewhat financially abusive as well, because he's wealthy and exploitative. I think that's how you say that, and whatnot. So Reagan continues her escapades in Alabama, and this time when she takes out Andrew, a very close associate of his, Francis, notices something is wrong, okay? Andrew had voiced very light suspicions, but brushed it under the rug, or brushed it off when Francis was like, hey, what the fuck? Anyways, Francis was much more worried about this than Andrew was. When Andrew is killed, in the same manner, he's been watching the news and he's noticing a pattern. It's the same way. Although Andrew was found in their home and not in any sort of slaughterhouse or meat processing facility. Either way, Andrew's dead. Francis has connections with Murkoff, specifically Clyde Perry. He has very light knowledge of what's going on at Sinyala currently, because at this point we're in the very, very early 1960. So this is like a few months after they've tracked down and collected Franco. And so then he calls up Clyde Perry and is like, hey, I think I got like someone that you might be interested in if my hypothesis is correct. And so Clyde Perry comes down to Alabama and interviews Francis and starts looking into the Alabama crimes that have been going on, and then extends out and finds out about the exact same kind of stuff that had been going on in Arizona, right under their noses, in fact, and California. And so he's like, yes, this is a person of interest, you were correct, Francis. Especially because, by Francis's description, Reagan had that charismatic influence that they were looking for, given she, A, got away with it this long, convinced her husbands, looked the other way completely. She had many of Andrew's employees and associates, like, around her finger. She had that kind of influence and this persona that made her look different than she actually was, which made her keep getting away with things. And by this time, Clyde Perry basically reaches out and is like, hey, let's find her. She still has to be somewhere nearby. Like, she very likely couldn't have fled across the entire country, and luckily for them, she didn't. She had just barely entered Florida when they finally caught up to her, and so she is inevitably captured and brought to Sinyala. It was even more of a point of interest when they found out that she was quote-unquote related to Franco, and when they looked in her past and found the marital history with Salvatore. So they snatched her up. And in fact, I did this on purpose after looking at dates while I was writing some of her files. She's technically the last prime asset that Clyde Perry is involved with before he too is dead, essentially. I actually had to tweak some of the dates because it happened too late, and I was like, wait, Perry's already dead in these original dates that I wrote. My bad. That involved some tweaking. Okay, that's the general backstory that I didn't really cover. It's kind of hard to tie it to Reagan's psychology, but I'll tie it into her cannibalism now. Where there's something in her head that ties the cannibalism to how she does the things she does, and there's a reason that she cannibalizes all of the husbands that she takes out. So this does not include Salvatore, where it's kind of like a weird bonding thing. You know, you hear that metaphor all the time, but it's also kind of like a form of control. She is very control obsessed. She likes manipulating how people think about her, how they act around her, and especially exploiting power. This is even... I'll do another video on her at Signala, but this repeats again with her and Coil. I'll talk about that later. But anyways, it's like a form of autonomy, like being able to die in one piece, and there's something where she's like, I'm not going to let people have that. If I am going to take them out, I am also going to take away that form of, like, autonomy. So, not only does she, like, dismember, that she's like, I like eating people, and I can also, like, that can feed into it, like, it feeds into one another, that kind of control over others. And the fact that she just, like, is down with that. So, that's kind of, like, my explanation for that whole thing and how it ties into the stuff that she does. Like, it's not just something she does in her crimes, it also connects to how she treats the potential romantic interests in her life. Now, I'm not exactly sure if any of her relationships could be considered romantic. Like, most of the time, she's either exploiting them for something, or there's a passive exploitation on her part. Because, to begin with, she didn't want to marry Salvatore. That just happened outside of her consent. And then the 3 times that she remarries, there's kind of something in her head of either, like, just getting by to survive, because they were all fairly wealthy men, and they had some kind of power that Reagan couldn't exploit. So there was, like, even if there was a surface level attraction there, that wasn't the end goal. That wasn't even, like, a middle goal. That was like, in the back of her mind for a good portion. I think that's basically what I wanted to cover. I can't think of anything else. Those are a majority of her relationships outside of Signala. She was fairly isolated, actually. I'll get into more of her relationships with, like, canon characters when I do the video on her at Signala, which will cover behaviors and trial environments, and just relationships with other prime assets, and even reagents, because I have a handful of reagent OCs myself. And I'll also touch on my other prime asset OC and her relationship with him. I might do separate videos on him. I'm still figuring some stuff out. I could probably actually all fit it in one video, unless I come up with something more, because I've been working on Reagan far longer than I've been working on him. So yeah, in that video it'll cover behaviors and relationships, and trial environments, and, like, technical stuff, gameplay maybe. But yeah, I'm pretty excited to work on her relationships with the other prime assets again. Coil and Franco are obvious in my mind, but I feel like there's stuff that can be explored between her and Gooseberry and the twins and Lilia. I'm really tired of talking right now. I'm so congested. Alright, see you guys later.